that Scottie Pippen's one of the more overrated players in NBA history.
Okay.
He don't get enough credit. Scottie was different.
Scottie was one of my all-time favorite teammates.
I mean, Scottie, you know, he was the real deal.
Probably the most outstanding basketball player in the Arkansas Intercollegiate Conference is the Bears center, Scottie Pippen.
Six NBA championships, 7 NBA All-Star nominations, and one of the greatest small forwards to ever set foot in the NBA. The man who came from nothing and won everything. The man who would have achieved a lot more, but chose to become Michael Jordan's shadow. This is the story of Scottie Pippen.
Probably the most outstanding basketball player in the Arkansas Intercollegiate Conference.
As of now, Scottie Pippen is worth over $20 million. The dude is rich, but this wasn't always the case. Born in Hamburg, Arkansas, Scottie was the youngest of 12 siblings who resided in a tiny 2-room house. His family lived in poverty. His father worked at the paper mill, and at times, even basic life necessities were a far cry. But life was still bearable until Scottie's father had a massive stroke that paralyzed him. This was the final straw. All hope of going to university was gone, but this did not stop Scottie from pursuing his dream. He spent hours and hours at the basketball court, worked really hard, and improved his skills. He eventually took his school team to the state playoffs and bagged all conference honors. Despite all this, he received no scholarship offers. When it seemed like there was no hope, one day while Scottie was out balling at the gym, he caught the eye of Don Dyer, the coach of the University of Central Arkansas. Don was so impressed that he picked him up as a walk-on. Things began to change as Scottie had a growth spurt and grew up to be 6'6". He then became the best player on the roster in his sophomore year, averaging 18.5 points and 9.2 rebounds per game. His numbers only improved during the next 2 years, as so did his height to a 6'8" frame.
Never heard of Scottie Pippen, but believe me, the NBA scouts heard about him, and Bill Russell was talking to people about.
Chicago Bulls was the only team that showed real interest in drafting Scottie Pippen in the 1987 NBA draft. That's why initially, when the commissioner, David Stern, announced that the Seattle Supersonics selected Scott Pippen with the 5th overall pick, fans were confused. But the Bulls had already struck a deal with the Supersonics, so Pippen was traded to the Bulls. This was the beginning of the era and the time when the iconic duo of Black Jesus, aka Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen was formed. Like every other basketball player, Scottie also had a fair share of controversies.
Words, Harper with the takedown, both benches emptied, and then this one really got ugly, spilling into the first row at Chicago.
During his career with the Bulls, Scottie was known for 2 things: being MJ's sidekick and refusing to enter the game during the 1994 Eastern Conference semifinals. It was the last few seconds of Game 3. The Bulls were taking on the New York Knicks, trailing by some points, but Phil Jackson drew up the play that featured Pippen inbounding the ball to Tony Kukoc. You see, Pip didn't take this lightly, as he felt insulted and decided to sit on the bench. Although Tony scored and won it for the Bulls, Scottie's actions was so offensive that it reduced Bill Cartwright to tears. Jeez, man. And it don't stop there. A few years later in 1999, when Scottie left the Bulls to join the Houston Rockets, to compensate for his contract, Charles Barkley took a pay cut because he wanted a super trio, and he felt like by doing so, Houston had a shot to be NBA champions. But unfortunately, things went south as the Rockets were knocked out by the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. After this disappointing campaign, Pippen asked the Rockets to trade him, preferably to the Lakers. This really angered Charles Barkley, who said, "I gave up more than anybody to get Scottie, and for him to want to leave after 1 year, it disappointed me greatly," he continued. The Rockets went out of their way to get Scottie, and the fans have treated him well. So I was just disappointed in him. To which Pippen replied the next day by saying, "I wouldn't give Charles Barkley an apology at gunpoint." Pippen said, never raising his voice, he can never expect an apology from me. If anything, he owes me an apology for coming to play with his sorry fat butt. Scottie excelled at nearly every facet of the game. In the 90s, no other player but Scottie had 9 all-defensive selections and even 7 All-Star appearances. MJ joined the Bulls in 1984. Until 1987, he played without Scottie. During all this time, his Bulls team had an absolutely pathetic 1-9 postseason record. They never made it past the first round. But after Scottie Pippen stepped in, Michael Jordan and the Bulls' fortune turned around. For the first time in his career, Jordan reached the second round of the playoffs after Pippen's arrival. Jordan had a 38-19 record with the Bulls. This means he won 38 games and lost only 19. Scottie was a game changer. He could shoot, pass, steal, and defend as well as any All-Star during that decade. Not only was he known for his on-ball perimeter defense, but he was also a pro when it came to steals. Pip led the NBA in steals per game during the 94-95 season and was known as one of the league's best in that department. Most importantly, from 1989 to 2000, he was the only player after John Stockton to dish out at least 5 assists per contest in every season. Bill Simmons even said, during the 1992 Olympics, Chuck Daly called Scottie his second best player, describing him as the ultimate fill-in-the-blanks guy.
Scottie on the drive, beats Vinny Johnson with a behind-the-back move. Left corner, Jordan, Michael fires, rimming, no!
Sidekick. It's a word that has been associated with Scottie Pippen over the last 20-plus years. But to be honest, even if LeBron James, Steph Curry played next to Michael Jordan, they would have been called the same. But guys, if I make a list of the most criminally underrated players in NBA history, Scottie Pippen would definitely be a strong contender for the top spot. Pippen joined the Bulls in 1987, but as the years went by, his role grew more and more important. He became a key player in the team's offense and defense. He was always the perfect second option after Michael Jordan. He made sacrifices on the court. He defended the opposing team's best players, played playmaker, and was forced to do the things that superstars normally never do. Jordan was the main man, was the Batman on the team, Chicago's true leader, alpha dog, whereas Scottie was his Robin. Always. Scottie wasn't always necessary, but he was always needed. Jordan was like the sun, and you know nothing can outshine the sun, no matter how bright. So Scottie was always overlooked. You see, there was one more aspect to the story. In the 1988 and 1989 playoffs, the Bulls failed to defeat the Detroit Pistons, who then quickly became their rivals. In those two series, Scottie averaged 9.5 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 3.6 assists per game. In fact, he played 1 minute in the 1989 Eastern Conference Finals after Bill Laimbeer elbowed him to the head. And in 1990, a migraine got the best of him as he shot 1 for 10 from the field. The narrative around Pippen was that he was soft and that he folded under pressure. But more importantly, Scottie was grossly underpaid for the majority of his career. Despite blossoming into a top 5 player in the league, he was making an average salary at best. He was not on the level of other superstars in the league on a financial level. Scottie seemed to undermine his worth, accepting whatever money was on the table to give himself and his family security. In the end, I would say Scottie is amongst one of the best players to ever step on a basketball court, if not the best ever. He came from rags to riches, encountered and overcame controversy. He was sometimes misunderstood. But looking at the entirety of his career, even with being a Hall of Famer, Scottie's reputation will always have him labeled as a sidekick, which is why Scottie Pippen is the most underrated player of all time.